Hey everyone! Today we're going to be talking about an important issue in housing, and that is evictions. So let's do a quick introduction so we're all on the same page. So first off, renters pay rent to a landlord. Now, if the renter doesn't pay rent for some reason, the landlord can file what's called an eviction notice with the court. And once that happens, the court schedules a hearing that both the renter and the landlord have to attend in person. Now, if for some reason the renter is late or does not show up to the courthouse when they're supposed to, oops, I didn't mean to erase that. There we go. If the renter doesn't show up, what happens then is what's called a default judgment. And in a lot of states, a default judgment automatically sides with the landlord, which means that the landlord can then go ahead and evict the renter. Now, since the renter has to show up in person, our researchers wondered, what role does transportation to get to the courthouse have in the incidence of these default judgments? So, in order to investigate this, our researchers did some really cool things. First of all, they looked at 200,000 cases in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 2005 to 2021. And what they did is they looked at these default judgments, figured out how many cases actually had them. And then what they did is they used Google Maps to figure out how long it took to get to the courthouse for that renter. Now, there were a lot of things that they needed to consider when they were doing this research, and there are a couple of things that they were worried might confound their results or kind of get into the mixture there, and they wouldn't be able to tell if it was just this transportation issue. So these are called confounders. And the specific ones that our research looked at were demographics of both the renters and the landlords. And they also looked at the socioeconomic status of the neighborhoods. And they took all of this information and they put it all into a model. And then what they did is they compared their model to two negative controls. Now, these negative controls are cases where they did not think that transportation was going to be something that impacted those default judgments. And there are two negative controls. One was during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is because during that time, these hearings were done via video call. So no one actually had to go to the courthouse. The second is in public housing cases. And in these cases, the default judgments are more lenient to renters. So there were actually not as many default judgments that resulted in evictions. So what did they find? Dun, dun, dun. Let's get a different color here. Results. So let's look at this in a graphical form because it's really easy to see the relationship here. So on the x-axis, we have time to the courthouse. And on the y-axis, we have the chance of a default judgment that results in eviction. And lo and behold, we see this relationship where the longer it takes to get to the courthouse, the higher the chance of a default judgment. And in fact, for every extra 10 minutes that it took renters to get to the courthouse, there was an increase of about 1.4% chance of a default judgment. And comparing to those negative controls, there were no impacts of the time to get to the courthouse on that chance of default judgment, which means that the model did a really good job controlling for those confounders that they identified early on. So what does this all mean? Let's discuss for a little bit. First of all, one thing that the researchers were really adamant about pointing out is that justice should be accessible for all. And their research showed that transportation could be an issue in achieving this accessibility. So they had some suggestions, two in particular, to kind of remedy this issue or make the issue a little bit better. One is more flexible scheduling for the hearings so that renters had more options on when they could actually make it to the courthouse. The other suggestion is the possibility of remote hearings. Just like the COVID-19 pandemic, that would eliminate any kind of transportation issues at all. But in the end, really what the goal should be is to reduce the number of evictions that are happening. And this is really important because evictions actually have a huge impact on other things in the community, like healthcare, schools, the courts themselves, and the local government. So reducing them would make the community a more happy place to be in, let's say. So, conclusion. You may be thinking at this point, well, how far away is my local courthouse? And how long might it take me to get there if I had to take public transportation? And I really, really encourage you to do that work because understanding accessibility, especially to a place like a courthouse that delivers justice, is really important to understand. So I would like to leave you with the idea that there are lots of reasons that can impact accessibility. And only one of them is transportation. So with that, I hope you learned something today and have a good one.